Hello, it's time for another Busa update. Unfortunately, the engine has a fairly severe oil leak that I've been trying to get on top of for a while. I've driven the car for about 250 miles, but it leaks oil way too much. I've identified where it's leaking from. It's leaking from the stator cover, and specifically where the wires come out of the stator cover going to the regulator. Let me just show you. So here we have the engine bay and the scuttle disassembled. I've already started stripping the engine in order to take it out. But let me tell you why. So the problem is with these wires down here where my finger is. You can see it just there, those yellow wires. They go into the stator cover. And you can see I've put some RTV around it in the hope that that would solve the problem, but it hasn't. So I've taken the bolts off the stator cover. It's a little bit cock-askew, a bit loose, but the problem is that it's so close to the actual firewall or the footwell that I can't get the stator cover off, and that's why I have to take the engine out. So the steps to take the engine out. First of all, I'm in the process of taking out all the wiring. That's nearly completed. And then once I've done that, the fuel rail. Next will be to take the drive shaft off and remove the clutch. Once I've removed the clutch and removed the drive shaft and the shifter linkage, I can do that at the bottom. I need to drain the oil and drain the coolant. I'll give you regular status updates as I go, and then I'll show you, hopefully, once I've got the engine out and I've got the stator cover off, I can show you where it's leaking from. Now that I've got all the electrics disconnected, it's time to take the exhaust off. So to do that, I have to remove the whole exhaust. So take it off its rear bracket and just dismantle it from the back going to the forward, and then take the individual headers off. So I'll get that done now. Okay, we've got the exhaust off now. Next, I'll lift the car up and drain the fluids. So that will be the coolant and the oil. Just draining the oil. You can see the RLM pan under there. I also have to undo the oil lines here and here. They're the ones that go to the cooler, so they need to be taken off as well. And after that, I need to do the coolant, and I think I'll grab the coolant line from the water pump here. So I'll take that off and drain the coolant. Okay, now I've got the protection off, the catcher for the drive shaft. Now I have to remove the drive shaft bolts. You can see them there, the Allen key bolts, just down here. So I'll probably do that from under the car. But before I do, I'll just remove the gear shift linkage. I'll undo it here, so that that is disconnected and I can just lift the engine out around it. I've removed the clutch slave cylinder. That way I don't have to bleed the clutch. The drive shaft bolts require a long Allen key hex socket that I don't have, so that's coming in the next few days, so I'll take it off then. I've now got the car off the lift. I've disconnected everything, I hope. I've did the drive shaft and the clutch, so that's all clear. What I've got at the moment is that I've loosened all the bolts on the mounts. I'm going to move the car underneath the lift, and I'll probably put a jack underneath the engine just to take some of the weight off the mounts to see if I can get the side support bolts out. Once they're out, then I can lift the engine straight out. So let's see how we go. Just a quick update. As you can see, I've got the straps going to the engine frame there at the top. I'm just removing these side bolts at the moment. That's proving more difficult than I'd hoped. And I'm just going to lift it up slightly to take some weight off the bolts and see if I can slide them out easier that way. But it's looking good. So now we're going to raise the engine, see if we can get it out of the car. So we're going to do this step by step. Yeah. now the last bit. Let's get this engine out. So the engine's now out of the car, and if I scoot around, we can see the engine now is on a small table, and you can see the stator cover, and you can see the mess I made trying to just clog up this outlet of these wires. What I want to do now is just take the whole stator cover off, have a look inside the grommet, and just put RTV around everything, and do that carefully. And I've got a new gasket for it as well. So let's get on to that. So here we have the stator cover off, and you can see this surface here looks pristine. And let's go down and have a look at the stator itself. I'll take this off, and I think the problem is around there. So here's the stator again. You can see this is the connector, and I've pulled the cables through a bit, so the grommet is up a bit. So what I plan to do is inject RTV into each of the holes and then pull the wires through so that there's RTV on the inside of that grommet. And then once that's done, I'll put RTV around this edge here, which is that edge in there, and make sure that it's all sealed up. And hopefully that will do it. Okay, so here we've got the stator cover, and you can see I've put RTV around the wires. Now I'm going to screw in the crank position sensor. Okay, here is the stator cover. I've put the gasket on, and I've put a light coating of RTV on that. Now it's time to put it onto the engine. So here we have the stator cover reattached. You can see there's some little RTV in the cracks there. I'm really hoping that this is what I needed to do in order to seal up the engine. So the next step will be to just clean up the engine bay, clean the engine a little bit, and put it back into the car. Before I put the engine in, I just want to show you one modification that I did. If we have a look here, we see that we have the stator connections coming out, and those three yellow wires here go to the rectifier. Now, traditionally they are being held in, they have connectors on them. But if you have a look at the connectors here, you can see that it's melted. And if you look inside, you can see that the wires, the connectors are melted. So essentially, too much current has been going through those connections. And I can show you the other end of the connection. You can see it's actually burnt out. So at some point that was going to fail. Looking at the higher Busa forums, they recommend just directly connecting them up. And it's not as bad as you may think. The rectifier can unbolt from the car. This is the connection that goes, this is the rectified output that goes to the battery and the rest of the car. And this is the crank position sensor. So we can take it off with the engine and still not have that weak point in there. So I just wanted to highlight that I've done that. So now let's put the engine into the car. So here we have the engine hanging above the car. It's important that the engine is level. So I've leveled that off, and I've adjusted the straps for that. I have to lower the engine and get it into the car. Now the engine itself is at an angle by a few degrees. So I probably have to move the car on the angle so that I can just drop the engine at the right level. The hardest bit was going to get these mounts in here, the top ones and the bottom ones. I know from when I installed the engine originally, that was difficult. So let's just try and get everything lined up as best we can before we actually commence. Okay, the engine is in. That took roughly an hour and a half. A lot of very fine movement on the lift and with the jack to get the bolts in it's really, really tight, and the bushings are very hard. So yeah, it took a long time. So now it comes to reassembling all the connections. What I want to do is get enough connections on the car in order to be able to turn the engine over, get some oil pressure. Once we've got oil pressure, then I can put the coolant in, finalize the rest of the wiring and hoses, and see whether it runs. So that's what I'll be doing next. I've got the engine in, I've got it all wired up except for the crank position sensor and the cam sensor. I'm now putting oil in. I'm going to see if I can just get the engine turning over to get some oil pressure. Once I've got oil pressure, I'll check the oil, fill the coolant, and see whether the engine will start. Okay, let's see if we got some oil pressure. You can see it rising. There we go. We have a few pounds of oil pressure, that's sufficient. And what I did, I took the spark plugs out. This poor starter motor had a hard job against the compression of the engine, so I took it out, and it makes it a lot easier. It spins faster, and now I've got oil pressure. Let's see if we can get the car started. Crank sensor. Okay, the engine starts. There's no oil yet. I'll let it run for a while and we'll see from there. The engine doesn't seem to leak. I ran it for about 15 minutes, keeping the RPM up and the oil pressure up. It seems to be okay. We need to take it for a longer drive, but for this time being, we'll say that the oil leak problem has been solved. Okay, thanks for watching if you got this far, and hopefully next time I'll show a driving video, which will be a little bit more interesting.